Clements Worldwide is the leading provider of insurance solutions to diplomats around the world. We do insurance for 6 out of every 10 embassy associations, for the US embassy associations around the world. We work, as Mark said, our specialization is cross-border business, high-risk areas, conflict zones, organizations, whether it's relief and development, NGO organizations, or UN agencies and UN vendors around the world, or for-profit organizations, but with the specialty of cross-border business. So when it comes to Africa, one of the things, anytime any organization, looks to go into another country or wants to increase investment in another country, there's a lot of return on investment analysis that goes on, which is great. Companies do that. It's a sophisticated practice that companies go through. But what gets missed most often is risk, or the actual challenges that you would encounter when you're practically in a particular country. And the world obviously is very much interconnected. So just an example of that is in December last year, Turkey asked for proof of insurance of the Russian ships that were crossing the Bosphorus. Now, anytime any organization, if you're in logistics or in good supplies, you would know that anytime a tanker leaves with goods, it already has proof of insurance with them. So what's different about this situation? Because this is a ship going through, and all of a sudden now you're required to provide a proof of insurance. What's different this time was that EU, along with the 7 industrialized nations, asked the insurance carriers, the Western insurance carrier, to not provide insurance to Russian tankers if the oil price was above $60 a barrel. And lo and behold, those ships were carrying oil which was priced at above $60 a barrel. So all of a sudden, the insurance on it was null and void. They did not have insurance, provided the insurer was a Western, insurance company. That created a challenge. One for Turkey, because if there was to be a spill as the ships were crossing the Bosphorus, who would be liable for it? There was no coverage at that point in time. So all shipment was stopped. And what that created was a traffic jam of ships in the Bosphorus. And what's the implication for Africa from that standpoint? The implication is that if you are a logistics company or a supply chain company or just a goods manufacturer or an importer or a medical supplies company, you're not getting your goods. Your business is now stuck because there's no, any business that was supposed to come through or any goods that was supposed to come through the Bosphorus is getting delayed. So that's just an example of what happens when there is a geopolitical event happening elsewhere in the world, and all of a sudden it has an impact on your own continent. So, I talked about risk and challenges with operating businesses. So I'm going to talk in 3 different sections. What do you mean by risk? What is it that companies need protection on, or individuals or organizations need protection on? Second, we'll just look at some of the case studies just to substantiate those points, and then some good the best practices that exist that I wanted to share with you. So when it comes to risks or challenges in operations, there's a program on CNBC in US called The Prophet. And the Prophet has this individual called Mark Lebonis who comes in and says, he goes in and buys businesses, and he talks about What? It's about people, product, and process. So if you have those three ingredients, you will have a successful business. So when it comes to protection, it's also about people, product, and process. You need to be able to protect all those three components of your business or your organization. So when it comes to people, so these are, I've listed the different categories of risks that exist from a business standpoint. So the first one in terms of people is your personnel. Those most businesses are very familiar with. You have to provide insurance to your employees. You have to make sure that they are protected. So those are standard risks. When it comes to products, that really means asset protection. So if you have physical assets or intangible assets, you need to protect those. And that's where your asset protection, whether in terms of property, in terms of cargo, comes into play. And then you have your process, which actually is your liability. It is the act of doing things or act of conducting business and the errors that arise out of doing business, some known, some unknown, some, it's how businesses look at it. And the point is there's always going to be risk in what you do and how you do it. And then you've got some location factors, which would be region-specific, continent-specific, and because this is the Africa conference, I'll talk about the African risks in specific. So it is about people, product, process that we need to protect for. So let's start with, this is an AIG heat map in terms of low risks. So the green, or actually the blue, is the lowest risk regions in the world, followed by green to all the way to red, or the dark red that you see maroon here. Those are the high risk areas of the world. So when you look at this graph, you can get a very good understanding of the landscape of risk across the world. And then if you focus specifically on Africa, that's the African landscape from a risk perspective as to how the businesses, as they're investing into Africa, look at it. So when they are doing their return on investment, or when they are making decisions on what country to go to, how to operate, what to do, this is one of the reference points from a risk perspective. As you can see, there are some good parts in terms of Namibia, Botswana, but then also you have the red areas. Libya, South Sudan, as an example, are the highest risk countries in the world right now. So this gives you, a perspective of what, from a geographical standpoint, what things look like. This is another way we look at risk, or how organizations look at it. This is a survey result. The survey is done by Alliance, and they put this out. And I won't go through all of them, but I would just touch upon them. The first one is the risk within Africa. The number one concern of organizations is macroeconomic development. As Mark pointed out, Africa needs trade, not aid, right? That is spot on in terms of there needs to be more activity. And given the current economic climate in general, I'm not surprised that rose to the highest level from a concern standpoint of doing business in Africa. Cyber incidents is something which has really shot up in last 5 years. That has been a very big concern for every business. That one is region agnostic. Every region in the world, every country in the world, cyber right now is figuring in the top 5. It is something, because as the world becomes more digital, as the world goes more online, cyber incidents are definitely top of mind from a business perspective. The third one is business interruptions. The example I gave of the Turkish restrictions on Russian oil is a classic example. Those are instances happening elsewhere in the world causing a disruption in your country. Climate change, again, that remains a broad concern. So And then regulations is another one that seems to have come up in the last 5 to 10 years. When regulations are getting more and more stringent, all the countries are getting more and more sophisticated when it comes to putting regulations out, which is not a bad thing. It's just that the cost of doing business, the time that it takes to get approvals to get into the country, or time to get licenses is just that has grown double or triple the amount of time you thought it was going to take. So as businesses look to go into particular countries, the timelines are a lot more fluid than it used to be. Political risk, political violence, again, a very big concern from an Africa perspective, and I will talk about it in a little more detail in the following slide. Theft, fraud, corruption, again, is specific to developing parts of the world, so not just Africa. It's also a concern from the Asian perspective as well. So Southeast Asia, that also figures. The one which is more specific to Africa is number 8, the critical infrastructure. It is about development. It is about making sure you have all the right infrastructure in place to promote trade or to facilitate the trade that you want to have in Africa. Energy crisis, everybody, again, it's a more recent phenomena, thanks to the Ukraine-Russia war, that everybody is suffering from that. And market development. It just, in terms of sophistication, the African market is not that sophisticated yet. So it is developing, it is growing, but it still has a long way to go. So all in all, that's the landscape from a top concern perspective in Africa. Here's another way to look at things, and this is in terms of, for a given risk, what's the impact? Is it a low impact, low severity, low losses, or is it high impact or high severity, high losses? That's one continuum. The other continuum is the probability, which is the likelihood of a particular event happening. That's the other way the businesses look at operations or future operations. And when you look at Africa, these are the kind of risks, the type of risks that are looked upon by the businesses. And this is part of what our experience has been with our clients as well. So the green and the blue are actually the pretty standard risks that anybody protects themselves against in the normal course of business. Whether it's your plant and equipment, or it's your resources, your employee insurances, so on and so forth, your contractual liability, the professional liability. That's true for anywhere in the world. It's not just about Africa. It's that you can, if I were to plot a North America chart or an Asia chart, it would have the same things in the same place. Like, those are low risk items. That's just the normal cost of doing business. That also has a low likelihood of happening, because every business has, in terms of their operations, general level of sophistication in what they are doing and how they are doing it. As you start to move up and right is when you start to see the reds. And we've, we've circled the ones which are high risk, high likelihood of happening, as well as if they happen or when they happen, has a high impact on the organization, whether it's financial or its reputation. It could be either or both. So some of the things in that section is political violence, for example. The other one is kidnap and ransom, personal accident, and your brand, your reputation, loss of life for individuals. Those are very high ticket items, and so another perspective from a business standpoint as to how they perceive risk in Africa. This is some of the learnings as well, based on data in terms of how the risk landscape looks like when you start to look at individual types of risks that exist. I talked about political risk, political violence. Those two terms are used very interchangeably, but it's very important to understand the difference between the two. Okay? Political violence is an act where you actually suffer a loss because of a particular act. And when you look at the space of political violence, it's either terrorism, which is, and the key there is a political, religious, or ideological difference. Okay, so that event is particularly incited by that, political, religious, or ideological approach to things. As well as when you have riots, or you have a coup, or you have a war. That's political violence. Okay? And the thing with political violence is what we see more and more of is as these civil unrests happen around the world, the Western businesses that are in a particular jurisdiction are bigger targets because you get more social media following by disrupting a Western business, a McDonald's or a Burger King, as opposed to a local business. So that's something that the business needs to protect for. Political risk, on the other hand, includes political violence. And political risk would have other factors in it. Let me give you an example for Ukraine. Okay, in Ukraine, when the Russian attack began, there was forced abandonment. That's not political violence, okay? But it's within the confines of political risk. We work with, for instance, U.S. Embassy, and the U.S. Embassy staff was asked to vacate the embassy and move out of Ukraine and come back to U.S. So they had to leave their personal belongings, their vehicles, all their assets in Ukraine. That is forced abandonment. That's political risk. That's not political violence. Political violence is actually very common. It's high risk as opposed to political risk. These are big events that needs to happen to instigate political risk. So as businesses think about different jurisdictions and going into countries, you need to make sure you're protected, and you need to make sure you're approaching it the right way as to, do you need political violence or do you need political risk coverage? Now, on to some case studies. The first one is, as I said, civil unrest or emergency evacuations. We've had clients, whether it's the civil unrest in countries in Africa or Middle East, or epidemics. Countries shut down, regions shut down, locations shut down, and you have to evacuate. Again, the cost, this is not, when you're going into a particular country, when you're setting up business, this is not something you think of. You always think about the opportunity, right? You think about how much money you're going to make, or you think about, if you're a nonprofit, what good you're going to do to the individuals or the citizens of the country that you're going into. But you never think about, if I need to get out, what happens? And it becomes very quickly very relevant. All it takes is one event for that to be triggered. So that's something we see quite often, more and more. The frequency is going up as well. The second one is natural disasters. Again, this probably is explained in the next chart better than this one. It does talk about when that happens, what goes on. We actually had a client in Africa, went through an earthquake, then they went into reconstruction, figured out, there was asbestos in the old building. Well, now what? Now you have to protect yourself against that liability at the same time, in addition to just the recovery efforts from the earthquake itself. This is a chart on Africa. These are the number of earthquakes in Africa in last 12 months. there have been 324 earthquakes in Africa with a magnitude of 4.0 or more. Does that surprise anyone? It surprised me when we were doing the data research on this, that 324 in just the last 12 months. Okay, and out of that, 50 earthquakes of magnitude 5 or more in Africa. So again, something, and I'm only talking one natural calamity. This is just earthquakes, and there are others. There's a flood, famine, so on and so forth. But just again, more of a perspective on as you look at business, what does that really mean? When you're going into a particular country. So depending on where you go, if you look at this, you do not want to be in Tanzania. Last year, for example, DRC, so Democratic Republic of Congo, had 61 earthquakes in a 24-hour period. In a 24-hour period. It's a big loss. The just in terms of context, the Turkish earthquake, which measured 7.6, right now the reported losses are $13 billion. That's just the reported losses, and we're still in early stages, and it's going to grow and grow and grow. So just the magnitude of loss that happens because of one natural calamity. Next is, again, just going back to that process piece. Sexual abuse is, we work with international schools, for example, in Africa, and things happen. It happens in nonprofits. And so this has been one case for us. It's still ongoing, 20 million and counting. Big loss. It's more importantly, it's reputational damage. So again, when you're going in, can you control every activity of every employee? The answer is no. It's a risk that you're taking, and in a lot of cases, whether it's your board or your management, they get personally roped in, because you're the one supposed to be supervising. You're supposed to be the one making sure everything is right. You have all the right policies in place. You have all the trainings in place. So again, from a business perspective, protection becomes key. These are just some of the common scenarios. Again, we've had another instance of an international school with an active shooter in a location in Africa. And we had to, again, look at emergency evacuations. We had to look at medical policies. We had to look at how to protect the students themselves and the faculty, and making sure everything was covered. Some of the general liabilities, low frequency, again, I'm not going to go into all of them, but those are some of the standard risks that we see on a quite often basis from a business perspective. And these are some of the general legal liability cases that you would see. Again, very frequent. But again, these fall more on that left bottom quadrant, low value, but also decent frequency from an occurrence standpoint. Then on to some best practice. How are organizations protecting themselves, and what they should be doing to make sure that you are protected. Again, you cannot protect yourself against everything. You cannot even conceive every situation possible. But there are some best practices that make you a much stronger, resilient organization. And the way we look at it is, in terms of your risk mitigation, there are these 3 stages. The first is basically pre-deployment. So before you're going in, you need to make sure you're prepared, okay? And what that comes down to is looking at, first of all, things like the landscape situation I described earlier, right? looking at the continent, looking at your specific country, looking at all the different risk summaries to make sure you understand the country that you're going into. Then making sure there is training to your staff. You have the processes in place. You write down the procedures in terms of if something was to happen, what's next? What are the remedial measures? So you need to be prepared as you go in. A lot of businesses have global offices, of course, and then you have your regional offices or your field offices. What's the communication? And the better the communication between the corporate and the field office, the better prepared you are as and when things happen. And it's engagement with your support network and your peer organizations, because others are either in or already are going in at the same time. So you want to share resources, you want to share ideas and on what to do if things were to go bad. The second stage is when an event is happening. And when an event happens, it's making sure your crisis response team or your emergency protocols are triggered. That is where the rubber meets the road, because you can prepare all you want. If it doesn't happen, if it doesn't get triggered at the time it's supposed to trigger, it was a total waste. It was all planning and no execution. So that becomes key. Important to understand who your emergency providers are. Where do you get your 24/7 service? Where and how do you evacuate? Where and how do you mitigate, right? So having resources to that as well. One of the things which is important is public relations. Do you have access to experts, lawyers, once an event is triggered? Something, especially if it has a reputational impact to what you're doing. So same thing with, we see a lot of kidnap and ransom cases, and again, who negotiates and how that gets done needs to be very well coordinated. And then the third stage is recovery. Right? Now that the event has happened, how do you get back to normal? That is very important from a organization perspective. What does your disaster recovery plan look like? So if you experienced an earthquake, it impacted your operations, you were shut down, how do you quickly get back? If you had a cyber event, how do you quickly get back? So making sure that the disaster recovery program is in place, that the best organizations have, again, a very meticulously designed recovery plan to ensure stability and the speed of operations returning to normal. The last one is on, again, making sure you have a crisis management plan in place. Again, nothing magical here in terms of this slide, but again, it lays down the different steps that you need to follow in terms of first assessing your risk, preparing for your risk, testing your safety protocols, and testing out your disaster recovery plans. It's as simple as that. But these are the steps that you need to make sure you're covered on as a business. So all in all, again, Africa is a big developing continent. There's a lot of potential, a lot of scope. I think that's where between Africa and Southeast Asia, those are the two regions where even we would be placing our bets in terms of growth and into the future years. And so all full steam ahead, but again, protection is key as you look at the business. Questions?
So as always, if you could please raise your hand if you'd like to pose a question, make a comment, briefly introduce yourself as well. We can hopefully have an interactive round. So don't be shy. First speaker of the event, who would like to go first? Anyone a comment or a question?
That's, yep.
Yes, okay. Next then I'll give you this mic and then I'll take it back.
Good morning, everybody. Your presentation was quite good, quite illustrative. I just wanted to make one comment. I'm called Chachu Girest. I'm from Cameroon. And talking about the risk factors in business, one of the things that we always face in African countries is a little bit funny, but you hear they'll talk about mystical resistance from the people. Maybe you hear that they block business people in one or two mystical ways. Maybe you see some type of mysterious things happening and all of that because the indigenous people in a particular place are not happy about that particular activity that is going to take place and all of that. So generally, there are some ways that you have to go maybe closer to the traditional authorities. I'm now talking about the management plan and all of that, that you have to meet the people, you have to give them tips and all of that. So maybe that witchcraft in quotes, that's what I wanted to talk about.
No, thank you for your feedback and your question. You're absolutely right. And what I cover is risks. What you're talking about is more cultural differences, which obviously is part of the consideration as you go into a particular jurisdiction. So it is imperative to understand the what works or what does not work in a particular jurisdiction, because there are loads and loads of examples of companies going in thinking their way was the right way of doing things, and it's not. It's you have to customize or tailor your product or service to the domestic market. You have to customize how you do things to the way things are done domestically. So having that, cultural understanding is absolutely key. So I know you put it as witchcraft, but I get what you're saying. Thanks.
Additional comments, additional questions?
Okay.
Hey,
Yes.
please. Yeah.
شكرا على اللي قدمها. تفاصيل المشاكل اللي تعيق التنمية الاقتصادية في بلدان. الحقيقة ذكر عدد من العوامل اللي تعيق تنمية الاقتصاد في البلدان بشكل عام. الفساد، المشاكل الأمنية، الطاقة، المشاكل السياسية. كيف إذا كل هذه العوامل جمعت في دولة واحدة؟ في هذه الحالة راح تكون المواجهة صعبة جدا. قد لا يتمكن الدولة لوحدها من معالجة هذا المشاكل، بل يحتاج إلى دعم دولي ومساعدة دولية للنهوض بالواقع الاقتصادي والبدء بتنمية اقتصادية تدريجية. لذلك التعاون من أجل التنمية والتوجه باتجاه تنمية اقتصادية جهد جماعي دولي لا يقتصر على دولة معنية بالذات، لأن مثل ما ذكر مرات قد تكون مشكلة اقتصادية في دولة معينة لكن لديها تبعات اقتصادية لدول أخرى. عندما يكون مشاكل أمنية وتدهور الأمني مشكلة اقتصادية في دولة معينة
economic issues are acute in the same country,
قد ينتج عنها الهجرة،
generate like migration.
قد ينتقل العدوى إلى الدول الأخرى
Could be
والبلدان الأخرى.
contagious for the neighboring countries or other countries in other continents.
لذلك عندما نرى مشكلة اقتصادية وأمنية في بلد معين
Certain economic problem,
علينا أن نتحرك دوليا أن نحل هذه المشكلة ونساعد الدولة
together
المعنية.
as countries to cooperate and help that country.
شكرا.
Thank you very much.
Now, you're absolutely right, Deputy Speaker, on that. And yes, you did point out all the challenges which exist for the particular country. So my understanding, and you know, we work with a lot of development organizations. We work with the likes of USAID. Yeah, and so there's a lot of, you know, programs in place right now. Even we see now, you know, the reconstruction efforts going on. So, you know, that's definitely going to go a long way in making sure that the country develops and all the challenges are taken care of.
Is there a final question or comment? Yes, okay.
Hello, my name is Hervé. I'm from DRC, Congo. Just a small comment. Well, I really appreciate your presentation, and all that risk is true. Well, the risk also can be everywhere, you know. As I was taking my plane here, someone told me, "Oh, be careful, you know, there's a war in Europe. It's close to there." You see what I mean? So, of course, there's a problem, but there is also some people who take that risk. They leave you in that image, portray it. They go there, they make a lot of money. For instance, I'm a lawyer. I'm advised to Europe in Congo. We've got also Roche, which is in DRC, and a lot of companies like DHL. Those guys, they make a lot of money there, but they show you the portrayed image, so they don't want you to come to take the risk. They know that the benefits could be double. So sometime, take the risk, travel, and, you know, make your inquiries and your due diligence with lawyers, so the risk can give more interest. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hervé. Okay. If you have any other questions, I'm around, and you know, if you want to send me an email, or you know, conversation, my phone number and contact details are here. Happy to have the conversation, and thank you very much.